I'm Marilyn Priel. Welcome to the Better Part. One of the most decorated combat units in United States history was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in World War II. Equally impressive is the fact that it was composed of all Japanese Americans, many of whom had been interned in American concentration camps. Stay tuned for the very interesting story.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program by and for seniors and devoted to exploring the many facets of those better years of our lives. The name of our program was inspired by a quotation from Robert Browning. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Now, sit back and enjoy a program made especially to provide seniors with useful information, plus some lighter moments to brighten your day.
I'd like to introduce to you an American ex-GI, Katsumi Hikido. Thank you for coming, Mr. Hikido.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Where were you born and raised?
Actually, I was born in San Francisco, although my family was living in Danville at the time. Mm-hmm. And my mom just went to San Francisco to, and I was born there.
I went there to be born. Huh?
Right.
And you're now living in Campbell, and you've
right.
been there many years in Campbell, California.
That's
mm-hmm.
right. So,
well, let's talk about the 442nd in which you served. And very valiantly, I might add. And what was the Japanese-American military history prior to World War II?
Well, when they began the draft system, I think it was in 1940 or thereabouts, a lot of the Japanese Americans, both in Hawaii and in the mainland, were naturally drafted. And so there were a number of Japanese Americans in the military service before Pearl Harbor was bombed. Mm-hmm. But what happened to them, when the war started, what happened was they didn't know what to do with the Japanese Americans, and so a lot of them were discharged, and those who remained were put into very menial tasks. I mean, their arms were taken away. I mean, their rifles were taken away, and they were put into like labor battalions and doing KP and
menial tasks and that sort of thing. So. Well, had there been some career people in there prior to World War II?
Well, I don't think there were too many Japanese Americans who were career, but I think they did manage to retain some people in the thing. But then later, when they formed the 442nd, then these people became the cadre for the 442nd. So,
all right. When the nation of Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, mm-hmm. of course, then the Japanese Americans, even the citizens, anyone with 1/16 or more Japanese ancestry, were interned into concentration camps, designated as enemy aliens.
Right.
What happened then to the people who had been serving previous to the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Well, like I said, these are the ones who were essentially, a lot of them were discharged. I mean, right, just like that. I mean, they said, we don't want you anymore. And so, they were discharged.
And how did they feel about that?
Not very good.
They were angry.
Well, yeah, they were mm-hmm. angry, and their pride was hurt. And mm-hmm. We all considered ourselves to be Americans, and mm-hmm. to be treated that way was not only humiliating, but it was, it was a real downer.
Tell us about the formation of the 442nd. When did that happen, and why did they form an all-Japanese regiment?
Another part of the story is that, right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and those of us who had registered for the draft were reclassified as 4C, which is enemy aliens not suitable for military service. And But Japanese Americans, though, and that was a very humiliating experience for American citizens to go through, to be designated as enemy aliens. And so what the Japanese Americans did was they pleaded with the government, and they petitioned, and they did all kinds of things to try to get the military to accept Japanese Americans. But when the idea of forming a combat unit formed of Japanese Americans was proposed, the Army rejected the idea on the basis that because of the universal distrust in which they are held, and they meaning Japanese Americans. But Japanese Americans persisted, and we were assisted by people of goodwill, until finally President Roosevelt, then on February 1st, 1943, then decided to authorize the formation of the 442nd Combat Team. And so it was on February 1st, 1943, that the 442nd was formed.
I see. So then eventually when they decided, I think it was January 1944, that they decided to come in and get those of you who were in the camps
Right.
to register and bring you out. What caused them? Why did they decide to do that? Just because?
Yeah, funny you should ask. What happened was the 442nd was formed, and then they were sent to Europe to fight. And also another part of the story, there was this 100th Infantry Battalion, just formed before the 442nd. And because of the record that the 100th Battalion and the 442nd compiled fighting in Italy and France, the Army decided that Japanese American soldiers were acceptable.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. And plus the fact that, being a cynical person, sort of, they needed replacements. And so they authorized then the reinstatement of the draft in January, like you say, in January 1944. They reclassified all of us back to 1A. And
to fill in the gaps. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Now the 100th Battalion was from Hawaii. It was an all Hawaiian group.
Right.
Now when they brought you, how old were you when you entered the military?
When I went in?
Uh-huh.
No, I was 20 when I went in.
Uh-huh. And when they brought all of you in, they placed you all in the 442nd, and then what kind of training did you have?
Oh, here I have to differentiate the fact that I was not with the original 442nd. I was a replacement who went in, after the draft was reinstated. Mm-hmm. Now, the original 442nd, I think they trained for about a year in Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and they went through all the routine of, the military or infantry training. But when I went in as a replacement, I had 13 weeks basic training in Camp Shelby, and then I went overseas. So.
And were you all from all parts of the U.S.?
Yes, but mostly we were from the West Coast, because that's where most of the Japanese Americans were. But yes, you're right. I mean, the Japanese Americans came from all over the country.
And how did you all get along? From all parts of the U.S., how did you all get along?
How did we all get along?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the mainland people got along fine. Initially, there was friction between the Hawaiian contingent and the mainland contingent, but the mainland people got along fine.
Mm-hmm. I heard one story that told where that they didn't really appreciate what your families had gone through being in the concentration camps, and that some of you, not you especially, but they were taken around and shown what your families were enduring while you were in the military. And they had an entirely different perspective of you, and probably a lot more compassion and respect, I would imagine. Well, how did it feel serving when you're going into battle and your family's back in a concentration camp? How did that feel?
Well, that was sort of our motivation, really, for fighting, is the fact that what we wanted to do was to show that we were just as good as any other Americans, and that that we were Americans, and that it was wrong for us to be incarcerated like that. And the fact that our parents were incarcerated, was, like I say, a motivating factor for us, that we were not going to back down, and we were not going to, we were going to do the best we could. So
when they actually began the draft again for you detainees, what was the reaction there? I know there were some people who resisted. They were angry because they said, well, we're not treated like citizens. Why should we go fight? And so I think there's...
Well, yes, it was a very divisive thing, as a matter of fact. And the thing that triggered it off was the military, in order to determine, who was suitable for serving, came up with this questionnaire, you might have heard about it, which contained a loyalty oath, so to speak. And the questionnaire had 2 questions in it. Question 27 said, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States, including combat, as so ordered? And question 28 said, will you forswear any allegiance to the Emperor of Japan and pledge your allegiance to the United States of America? Well, that in itself, caused a great deal of divisiveness in the camp, because they were saying, they were saying that, why now? If you're going to determine our loyalty, why don't you do that before you put us in camp? And so a lot of them protested by, saying, no, I won't go fight, and no, I won't forswear allegiance to the emperor. But so that was a divisive thing. But when they reinstituted the draft, though, that came about a year later. A lot of people then felt that, you have taken away our freedom. You basically made us non-citizens. Why are you coming now to take us into the army? And that's the way, a lot of them felt. And so there was a group of men, who are the draft resistors, and who decided to use that, their resistance to the draft as a means of highlighting the injustice of their incarceration in camp. And they were the ones who refused to be inducted. Okay.
So some were actually incarcerated, weren't they?
Right.
Well, now those of you who, for whether you were scared not to go or whatever you wanted to prove yourself, you certainly showed well in Europe. You were in the European theater.
Yes.
And then I know that I've heard it said that they kind of felt like they were cannon fodder, that they were sent places where no man wants to go, so to speak. But that you were very enduring, brave people. And another thing, you were, most of you are small in stature, so I just have to try and imagine you fighting, 6'2" German or something, So I'm sure you have every reason in the world to be proud. And I know you told me that because you were 5'8"
I was 5'8" at the time.
You were 5'8", so you got to carry the brownie because you were one of the bigger fellows. So.
Right.
Well, first of all, let's tell how large a regiment this was. What did it consist of?
Well, see, the regiment consisted of the 442nd Infantry Regiment, which was 3 battalions of riflemen, and then they had a service company, and then it had a combat engineering company, an anti-tank company, and a military band. And so there were about 4,500 men in all, when they were first formed.
And then when it became at its full strength, how many were in there?
I forgot to mention the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion. And that's an important part of them. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
When it was at full strength, you had the largest number of people. How many were in it during that time?
How many were in it? About 4,500.
4,500.
Right.
And there were a total of some 14,000 who had been in the 442nd.
Right. Because most of us were replacements.
Well, let's talk about. They went into Europe. Into Italy. They fought their way through all kinds of battles to get into Italy, and then when they got there, they were stopped at the gate, so to speak, and put aside, and they let another unit come in and
Rome,
take the glory. Now, you boys were not happy about that, were you?
Yeah. Yeah, for some reason, they did that to us twice. I think, when they captured Rome, that happened to us. They put us aside and let somebody else go in. The same thing happened at Dachau, later on. Japanese Americans were among the people who rescued the Jews in Dachau. And for a long time, the Japanese Americans never got credit for that. And we believe it was because the Army was kind of embarrassed because here these boys who were releasing these Jews in the concentration camp, most of them had parents in concentration camps back in America at the same time. And so I think that was a source of embarrassment to the Army. So,
What are some of the other major participations that this regiment had?
Well, see, the 442nd, the 100th and 442nd, when they went in, they went in from Africa, and they fought their way up through Sicily and Italy, and then they went to southern France, where most of the heavy fighting went in. And I think the most famous battle for which the 442nd is known is their rescue of the so-called Lost Battalion. And the Lost Battalion was the 1st Battalion of the 141st Regiment of the 36th Division, which was a Texas division. And somehow in the battle, the 1st Battalion overextended themselves, and they were cut off by the Germans and totally surrounded. And they were in danger of being annihilated. The General Dahlquist, who was the commanding general of the 36th Division, ordered his other two regiments to try to rescue the Lost Battalion, but they both failed. And so General Dahlquist then called in the 442nd to come in and to try to rescue his trapped men. And, and for the 442nd, our motto is go for broke, which means that you're given an assignment, you're going to complete the assignment or die trying. And so, so the 442nd went in, and after about 7 days of, really heavy, fighting, they managed to rescue the Lost Battalion. And they managed to save 211 Texans. But in the process, the 442nd lost about 800 men. So it was, it was a very costly campaign, but successfully completed. But following that, though, the 442nd was no longer in a fighting condition. And so they had to pull back to rest and until the replacements like myself came back in to reinforce the outfit and to, build up the strength again. So.
You were highly decorated, your regiment. And then what was the percentage of losses? I know that it was one of the largest in the war for your group. Do you know what the percentage was? Something like 53% of the men were lost?
It's hard to see the percent because there were so many men coming in and going through. And so, like I said, there were about 13,000 men served in the 442nd before it was over. But out of that, I think about a little over 800 men were killed in action. And there were 9,400 and some odd Purple Hearts awarded for combat injuries. And so that kind of gives you a feel for the number of people who were wounded and number of people who lost their lives. So,
do you think that it's inherent in the Japanese character, or it was because of trying to prove yourselves good, loyal citizens and so forth, or a combination that made you all so brave and really enduring so many hardships?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. We do have this sort of the samurai background, if you call it that. Our cultural background in Japan was to endure, gaman,
Stoic.
and do your best, whatever the situation is, try to do your best. So we had that cultural background. But then, as I mentioned earlier, we had this additional incentive of trying to prove we were loyal Americans because we were incarcerated. And so there was that. So I don't know what else I could say about that. Is the fact? The fact that also that we were part of an immigrant, group, and we were second generation, and we were, still in the process of trying to be accepted in this country. And so that also, I think, was a motivating factor in us, that we were trying to do our best during the war, so that after the war, we hoped that things would get better, both for us if we survived and for our families, if we didn't. So, so those things were all motivating factors. But one thing that keeps coming out, the fact that when the Japanese American boys went off to war, almost invariably the parents said, if you have to die, you have to die. But it says, please do not bring shame on the family. And so that was sort of the imperative that almost every Japanese American soldier went out with. So that was sort of topmost in our minds. So,
what was it like when the boys came home? I've read various things. Some of them in certain parts of the country were really mistreated.
Yeah.
And slandered and bad things done to them. But you returned to the California, the Valley of California.
See, the most difficult time was right after the war, 1946, 47, 48. And you're right, even some soldiers who were in uniform with all the decorations were mistreated, and barbers would refuse to cut their hair, and and that kind of thing.
They wouldn't serve them in restaurants, I heard.
But I never encountered that. See, the reason was that I was wounded, about 3 weeks before the war in Europe was ended. But I was so severely wounded that I was in the hospital for 2.5 years to recover after that. And so it was not until 1947 that I was released from the hospital. And so I basically missed a lot of the, the initial difficulties of readjustment in coming back after the war. So another factor that helped me readjust was the fact that, as I was being discharged, right before I was being discharged, I had applied for application at Stanford University because, before the war had interrupted my education, and I was a freshman at the University of California, Berkeley, before the war started. And so when I came back as a discharged veteran, then I applied for Stanford, and Stanford accepted me because I was a disabled veteran. And so I immediately, after I was discharged from the hospital, I started Stanford University. And so that took another 4 years. And so my readjustment time, right after the war was kind of facilitated by those things. So.
Well, you said something to me about the Constitution that I love the way you said it. I hope you can remember how you said it. And
yeah, I'll try. Yeah, we've been talking about the military experience of the Japanese American during World War II. And, with regard to that military service, sometimes we are asked, why did you have to risk your life to prove your loyalty to America, when we were American citizens whose rights are called out in the Constitution? And that's a good question. But, experience shows, though, that even though we're talking about the Constitution of the United States, that words and phrases do very little to protect the rights of minorities at a time when the minorities need that protection the most. And that's when the majority wants to trample on their rights. And so case in point is the fact that, whatever the Constitution says about our rights did nothing to prevent us from being hustled off into concentration camps, and without due process and total disregard of our constitutional rights. And you say, well, why did that happen? How did that happen? Well, it happened because the Constitution is not the ultimate authority in this country. The ultimate authority is the will of the people, or another way of putting it, the consent of the governed. And unless you have a well-informed, sound, and uncorrupted public opinion, giving life to your Constitution and standing behind it, then really the Constitution is nothing but a piece of paper. I mean, it doesn't do any good at all. And so, so what happened was that during World War II, the prevailing opinion by Japanese Americans was that we were either disloyal, or at best, the Americans weren't quite sure where our loyalties lay, and that's why we really ended up in concentration camps. So what we perceived was that we needed to change public opinion, from negative to positive. And so when we were asked then to take up arms to fight for America during World War II, well, most of us saw it as an opportunity to do just that, to do something concrete and visible that we could use as a basis, for, changing public opinion in our favor. And also, after the war was over, we hope to use that record, to try to facilitate our acceptance into American society.
Well,
And, excuse me, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I'm sure you helped many other ethnic groups, and we all appreciate what you did. And thank you very much for telling us about it and for coming to this program.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this show and our guest, Katsumi Hikito's story. If you would like to be a guest on our show, or if you have a topic you would like for us to discuss, you may reach us through the Cupertino Senior Center at 408-777-3150. You may also order tapes and learn all about our group and our schedules at our website, www.thebetterpart.com. Goodbye for now.